Hi, I'm Christy Eccles, instructor of bass at Westfield State University. I'm located out of Hartford, Connecticut, and perform frequently for various jazz groups, contemporary ensembles, orchestras, and musicals throughout New England. In this video, I'll walk you through some tips that will help you prepare for the upcoming district jazz band auditions. Let's start by examining our written bass line. Softly as in a Morning Sunrise is a little different because we will switch in and out of a fast bossa nova bass line into a walking bass line, which you may be more familiar with, but switching between the two requires us to think about creating two different tones on the bass. Even though this is a faster Latin bass line, we want to remain light in the fingers with minimal fingerboard noise. One aspect that will help you with this is keeping a solid right hand technique where you keep the thumb glued to the fingerboard and let your fingers and arm weight pull through the strings rather than plucking up. For example, now, something that we have to consider is that during the Latin section, you're going to focus the accent or groove of the bass line on 1 and 3. Think of it as riding the waves into the sunset. It's fast, but our boat isn't out of control. You could think about it being in 2 as well. With a fast Latin bass line, I do tend to lean more towards that. Lastly, we can play this beginning line all in half position. Thinking about shifting less and using open strings allows us to groove harder and stay in tune more easily. Now, for the swing section, we want to continue that right hand thumb being glued to the fingerboard, but allow more weight into the string and to really drive the tempo and feel of the band through our quarter notes. The trick to this is to start thinking and swing the last 2 beats of the second ending before the swing section and really accent 2 and 4. Because of that swing section, instead of doing 1 and 3, we'll be going back to accenting 2 and 4 like any walking line would. As for the fingering in the swing section, you always want to think about staying in one position as long as possible and to utilize open strings for shifting purposes. I start this walking line in half position, and that will take me all the way to the second measure of the C7 flat 9 until I have to shift. That's when I'll have to shift. Another example would be at the F minor 7. Instead of shifting back to third position, I would play those fourths across on the D string, like such. Instead of. Then, by staying in the neck position, I can shift to second finger for the A natural and use the open D as a tool to shift back down the neck. Now I will show you the whole swing section. For the solo section, you'll notice that the bass part provided has chord changes and lead sheet with slashes, meaning that we will have to make our own bass line. For the Latin section, I want you to think about focusing on the most important notes, also known as the root and the fifth of each chord, while keeping this dotted quarter note to eighth note rhythm going. So to start, I'll show you what each root and fifth of each chord is. So our first chord is going to be this C minor. So the root is going to be C. And the fifth is going to be G. You could also play it on the open G string, which I suggest. Now for the D half diminished 7, we're going to have D as the root and A flat as the fifth. For the G7 flat 9, we're going to have G as the root, D as the fifth. And for the F minor 7, the root's going to be F, and the fifth is going to be C. Or you could play it here. And then lastly, we have the B flat 7, flat 9. The root's going to be B flat, the fifth is going to be F. Now all we have to do is put it together with the rhythm. If you're having trouble staying in the groove, keep it simple. If you are feeling confident, feel free to add in eighth notes and various passing tones to spice up the bass line. But the most important thing is to keep the groove. So don't do anything fancy if you feel that it will sacrifice your groove. For the swing, you can always think of root, third, fifth, seventh, which would work, but is going to sound choppy. I recommend approaching it from a scalar approach, which means like a scale. This creates depth and a sense of direction in your bass line that's really going to take it somewhere, rather than it being stagnant. Lastly, if you still aren't comfortable with making it up on the spot, I suggest writing out your own lines separately to fully understand what you are playing, and then remove your own written line to improvise freely. Okay, so at first glance, this is tricky because we are bass players who are mimicking a horn solo with this written improv. However, approaching this as a bassist will help us be able to transfer this language over to our instrument better. You are going to want to apply this usage of hammer-ons and offs and what I like to call economic fingerings. Again, staying in one position as long as possible, then shifting or figuring out the best fingering that allows you to play each lick easier. Sometimes the wrong fingering can mean the difference from being able to play it right or not being able to play it at all. So let's start by talking about a fingering first, okay? I'm looking at measure 6. What's tricky about this is that we've got to get a lot of these flats, and that's hard when you're playing bass. So I'm going to start second finger on that F sharp. I'm going to stay in that position. And I'm going to continue to stay in this position, and I'm just going to do a slight pivot down to that E flat. That's going to allow me to really facilitate it a little sooner. I'm going to play it in time for you now. So if we're looking at a hammer on, I'm going to go, or really a pull off, I'm going to look at measure 10. I'm at this D half diminished 7 chord, and we've got a triplet figure that has G, A flat, G. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack the G string, and I'm just going to put my first finger on it, and then I'm going to pull it off to get that G again, like such. One more time. And then as soon as I do that, I actually want to make sure that I keep my hand pretty close to that fingerboard so I can get to that F sharp. As such. Another thing to kind of look at is going to be measure 12, okay? It's really tough to get to that A flat, especially when you got to go right into that triplet. So what I suggest is this is a great example of using an open string to shift. So I'm going to take the pickup right before measure 12. I have this E flat that I'm starting on, and I just want you to watch for a second. Okay, I'm going to use that open D to shift, and then I'm going to hammer on the first part of that triplet and re-attack on that B natural. This is it in time. Lastly, last thing to kind of look at would be measure 23, right? We've got this kind of 16th note run that's a little bit tricky. What I like to use is I'm gonna do 4th finger on the F, 1st finger on E flat. I'm gonna shift back, 4th finger on D, 1st finger on C. And instead of shifting down the G string, what I'm actually going to do is just pivot back to 1st finger B. I'm going to use 4th finger A flat. Then I'm going to shift back, 1st finger F, 2nd finger F sharp. I'm going to do 4th finger G. And here's another example where we're going to use open D to shift back and do 4-1. I'm also doing a combination of slurring it, hammer on, pull off. So whatever way makes the most sense for you is what you should do. Everybody's going to do this slightly differently. This is just how I do it. I recommend that you practice to figure out what way works best for you. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this now. It's also really important when you're working on written improvs like this that feature horn parts to remember to start slowly and then build up in tempo. So for our improvisation section, you can think of the melody. You can lean on making a bass line type solo, or you could use some of the licks from the written out improv. Additionally, you could focus on using chord tones such as the 3rd and the 7th. And remember, you don't have to be playing continuously. Space and repetition is good, especially for bassists. I like to do a mixture of all of these while also maybe having some pedal tones and again, more of those repetitive figures. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate the solo section to you now of what I would maybe do in an improv solo. Next, we're going to move on to scales. Scales are something you should be working on every day. I recommend the Vade Mecum books to learn scales and different fingerings. And over time, you're going to become more comfortable with these scales, but it takes practice. There's no shortcut for scales. It's really the most important thing is having a set fingering that you do every time when you play each scale. Another trick is figuring out what fingering can work for multiple scales, if they can, or if they just need a slight adjustment. For example, if I'm talking about my D major scale, I'm going to use the same fingering for my A major scale. The fingering is going to be open string, first finger, fourth finger. We're starting in first position as well. Open string, first finger, fourth finger. We're going to shift, second finger, fourth finger, and then go back down. We can use the exact same fingering for A major as well. I'm going to demonstrate that to you now. Again, we can use the exact same fingering for A major. We're just going to move it down a string. Lastly, the chromatic scale. Start your chromatic scale on the low E string and work your way up by shifting with the second finger out of half and first position. I would stay away from using the fourth finger as it will slow you down. Lastly, for your audition, the part that everybody fears, sight reading tips. To practice sight reading, you have to just practice it. That's all there is. The best way to do this is to work on different etudes, maybe old big band music that you haven't played in a while, looking through, various books that you've had over the years, continuing to work on your scales, or by reading through walking lines and transcriptions of walking lines. You can find all of this online with a quick Google search. A little bit of practice each day towards this really goes a long way. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you work with the tips provided and practice diligently, I know that you will do well in your audition. Best of luck. We can't wait to see you at Westfield State.